numbers. You see, there aren't many professors in the German schools and in the Dutch schools and other schools. So there's respect, and you may not be any better teacher, but if you get that title of teacher, you have the respect. And to me, that is as important as a few thousand more dollars.
I'd like to go on a different vein here while we're looking at society. Not only a lack of respect for teachers, but I think today we're looking at a society that is very, very different from, say, when I began teaching. We do have a large segment of our students now who are coming from divorced homes, who may be a single-parent home. There's just no continuity. You have children coming to school having not had a breakfast. It's not unusual to have students say they never eat with their family. There's nothing of family life anymore. And the teacher today is expected to be not only a teacher, give them the basics, but we also have to be their mother. We also have to be their preacher. We have to be their counselor. We're just expected to do it all. If you get a chance to teach, okay. But the social problems that the young people are facing anymore are so outweighing their minds and so forth, they're not really too concerned about, why should I learn what's in the book? I've got other problems.
How have you changed with the trends, Dr. McFarland? With the situation with, as Mrs. Kemmer brought up, about divorced families. The world's changing. How has it changed? Has it changed on the college campus as well?
Student attitudes?
Student attitudes.
Well, as
feeling towards education, because at one time to go to college was to be a minority. Not many people went to college. When my dad was a boy and when my grandfather was a boy, my grandfather went to the 7th grade, was the highest that he went to. My father, and I think it was quite gutsy on his part, was encouraged to stay on the farm and go to the 7th grade, but he fought on and went to college and got an education because he saw the value in it. In those days, people had rough times and they fought it out and made it. Are people becoming more lax in today's society towards education?
Well, first of all, I would say, I've been here 30 years now, that we still have some students who are just as good, just as motivated as they were 30 years ago. But what I find at DePauw is that the spread is much greater. You have people, maybe their intelligence is not all that much different. I don't know, I don't test them. But some people come to class, if they come to class, and their greatest joy is if you say, we won't have a class today. And so that attitude, and along with that goes, if I can get a grade without learning anything, I'm happy. And so there are some people like that. I'm not saying there weren't always people like that, but I find that the attitude is bad for more people. And maybe it's my classes. I don't know. It's not easy, I think, to teach chemistry, especially to someone who's just taking it because they have to take it.
Now, is this because of a flaw in the system, perhaps, where a student has been discouraged or in the education system, or feels left out and therefore has this attitude? Mrs. Kemmer?
I don't know I don't know how I would answer on that particular one. I think that students today are just really not interested in what's going on in the school system because they have so much pressure coming in from them of becoming a young adult, getting the keys to the car right away, being their own person, being out, dressing as an adult does. If you have everything, why are you going to be concerned about doing something that looks like it might take a little bit of effort, a little bit of work? And therefore, let's put education down. Education, school is a nice place to go to see all your friends, but don't make me do anything. Now, I don't want to leave a negative attitude because I teach because I love teaching, and we do have good students. But in the course of over the years as I have been teaching, there is a lowering of standards now, simply, I think, due to the fact that we don't see the value of education anymore.
And the facts would back that up. Recently in the USA Today, there was a survey result, and it stated that the SAT scores for this past year were the lowest ever. Now, what are we not learning, Dr. McFarland? Has education changed? Are we at one time learning the basics and now getting away from that and becoming less knowledgeable on the facts? When my dad was a boy in English class, they had to learn sentence diagramming. I have English classes today in high school that dealt with generalities in English. We read certain poets, which was very good there, but I never got the basics on grammar. What do you say?
I think, I don't know how I can relate this to SAT scores, but I think many in the present generation don't see much value in much of what is taught in college. And I'm sure that many pre-meds, and I'm not putting down pre-med, I'm sure they would much prefer to go directly into medical school because that's what they like. So they can't, not always very interested in what's not going to be good for me. But what we don't seem to understand, I think, is that English and the social sciences are going to be very valuable to you. One of the things I learned when I got out of college, I went to work for the DuPont company, that if I could not communicate, I was really in trouble because every quarter we had to go before the management and present in 15 minutes everything we had done and write a paper. So I think, though, that we've come to the point where we don't appreciate all this business of education. We'd rather get rid of most of it, and we'll do it as little as we can to get through it. We hope we get an A, because that looks good, you know, to wherever you go next. So now, as far as SAT scores, I'm not familiar enough with the sorts of questions that are asked on SAT. I don't know what that, I've never thought it measured your intelligence. It probably measures a lot of how much you cram, and the same with MCAT, and the same with much of testing. I can give a quiz, you know, a pop quiz, and
I've taken a few. I've taken a few.
You know, and if I haven't told you in advance, although I've talked about it in class and talked about it several times, and I don't tell you that, I'm not talking about you, of course, but if I didn't indicate that I was going to have a quiz, people may blow it completely. But yet if I say I'm going to have an exam on Monday, they will get ready over the weekend. But now the question I always have, how much will they remember if it doesn't sort of come in?
Now you bring up a good point there. Memorization versus actual learning. Have you seen a shift in students from learning to getting the quick fix with the memorizing, and if you ask them a week later, they forget?
They don't memorize at all anymore. If you ask them to memorize, what do we have to do that for? I don't want to do that. Now, what good's that going to do? There's not so much of that anymore as when I was in school. I often tell my students, I went to a one-room school. I also remember every Friday afternoon was memorization afternoon. And we had to stand up and recite all the things that the teacher had required us to memorize that particular week. Now, I have to admit, I probably don't remember anything that I memorized at that time. What I find in the students I think we ought to look at is the fact that most students come into class. I teach English. Okay, it's a required class. You try to impress upon them, you know, you're going to have to be able to communicate, you're going to have to be able not only just talk, but you're going to have to be able to write. And they don't really see that. They can't make the connection between English class, well, I'd rather go down to government class, that's more fun, or, well, let's go to chemistry class, that's more fun. English, I mean, why do we have to go there for? For example, teaching American Lit. You try to ask them about their American history class. Why would you ask about American history? And we'll say, isn't there a connection? Where do you think the historians found out to write about their history? They went back to the diarist, the literary people who were recording what was going on in America at that time. They've built their history based on that. Oh, they don't see how one class relates to the next class.
And how it's relevant to life.
That's
too.
right.
That
That's
used to
right.
be the big question in high school. Why is this important to me? What is this going to change the price of oranges or anything?
Right.
Now in Japan, for science, they have a system of learning. You can back me up on this. In science class, they emphasize, especially in the high school, with concepts that are valid for everyday life, where if we were in the United States, we'd have a chemistry book in high school, and we'd read about acids and bases, titrations and such. And if you read that, one may not, one might fall asleep possibly, or get discouraged.
Some do.
Some do. Some have. But in Japan, what they do with acids and bases, for example, is they'll get a real-life situation. They'll involve the kids in the procedure. Now, I've noticed at DePauw, I always enjoyed professors who have done that. Is that something that could be emphasized more in the high school, perhaps, even on a college campus, too? Dr. McFarland.
I'm sure. And we don't do enough here, I think. Some do. But there are certain principles, and I suppose if you learn the principles along with the practical bit, it's okay. The laboratory is, in a sense, doing it, although you're having something that's actually done, and you can see, well, I just made a nylon hose today or something like that. That would make it more interesting, I'm sure.
Mrs. Kemmer?
Well, I'm sort of startled that you're saying that the Japanese are doing that much, because what I remember is that it was mostly rote learning and not much hands-on performance, this type of thing. The Japanese tend to memorize things and, give them back. They can really give it back to you verbatim. And one of the difficulties that a Japanese student has when he or she comes in to our school system is they get this question, why? Why do you do that? And I think that's a difference in our education from some of the other countries, where we do try to get the student to think more in terms of how is that going to relate to life? Why do you think this is important?
So you find them more strict?
I think so.
In some of the research I had found the opposite. That's interesting. Maybe it's different people go to different high schools and different situations like that. That's interesting too about the education system, is when they say in the news, America standards are low. Well, that's not saying all American students. That's in pockets. There's good and there's bad. Now, there's one question I want to bring up about the Japanese. You bring about the memorization. They bring up about the strictness and everything. Are the kids happy? Are they producing unhappy kids?
I don't think so. I think they just assume this is the way it is. We're in school now. We have to do this hard work. We're trying to pass the exam. It's just part of their culture. The family expects them. No one argues, are we going to do this or not? What I find interesting in Japan is that they don't have the high compulsory age limit for going to school. I think you only have to go through elementary school. But the assumption is in Japan, everybody goes to school. Who would stop after grade school? Who would stop after junior high school? You're going to go on to high school. The big problem is then getting into the